This is the Education Blueprint, podcast where we frame excellence in public education. With Dr. Jon Rysewyk of Knox County Schools, I am Prentice Elliott, your producer, co-host, and the parent of 5 kids in public schools. And John, today we talked to Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. We got to hear a little bit about his life before becoming mayor, and then a pretty good overview of the future plans for this growing community.
Yeah, Mayor Jacobs coming in and just really giving us a really good description of what I would think is a very complex process on how we do future community planning in the county. And through his plan, Advance Knox, I just thought he did a really good job explaining all the ins and outs of that.
And then you and I were able to talk about how Knox County Schools addresses growth, a few parallels with how the county does it, and we closed out with some great advice from Mayor Jacobs for kids that may want to get into public service later in life. Let's get into it. John, today we're talking about growth. This is actually not the kind that you track on your doorframe as your kids get taller.
No, not at all. This is a much larger scale. We're looking at the growth of our entire community and how that affects everything, including schools.
Yeah, and I think that with the way Knoxville's been growing recently, it would be hard to track that on a doorframe. We're talking astronomical growth. And to help us out with this conversation, our guest today is someone who really understands why people come to Knoxville and Knox County. He is a 3-time wrestling world champion, WWE superstar, and Hall of Famer Kane, known outside the wrestling world as Glenn Jacobs. Listeners may be wondering why we're talking to him about growth in Knox County, Tennessee. So I'm just going to explain that real quick. Having lived in and visited a lot of other places, he says Knox County is the best place to live, work, and raise a family. Born in Spain, raised in St. Louis, Missouri, a former resident of Jefferson County, Tennessee, Glenn Jacobs was elected Knox County Mayor in 2018, re-elected in 2022, and is about to finish his second term. Mayor Jacobs, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me today.
It's great to have you. We can't do the education thing without obviously your vision and the county as a whole working on that. So thanks so much for being here.
I think the partnership now between Knox County government and Knox County schools is stronger and more robust than it has ever been before. And so much of that is due to you and your approach of being very collaborative and actually working in partnership.
Well, let's jump in. You're about to finish your final term as Knox County Mayor, but you had a very successful wrestling career before that. And you were also a business owner before you took the role as mayor. So I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to run for office.
Really, the reason is because I've had an extraordinary life. I've had tremendous opportunities, and I'm a product of the American dream. I mean, my family didn't really have a whole lot when I was growing up. My mom and dad worked very hard. When you think of just your average, hardworking, normal Americans, it's my mom and dad, right? But times could be tough. I just found something I was good at, professional wrestling of all things, and was able to just lead a life that I wouldn't have thought possible when I was a kid. I think that is only possible in this country. We reward things like talent, hard work, and individual achievement, because the only way that I could be successful is enriching other people's lives, adding value to their lives in some way.
So what made you think, again, a chance to be a celebrity, chance to own businesses, do things like that? What made you say, to go to public service is really the way for me to continue that dream?
Well, sure. For me, it was because of my kids and grandkids.
You haven't always been mayor, so maybe talk a little bit about those early experiences for you. It's important for our kids to understand what kind of experiences did you have early on that have kind of prepared you for this role and for your life?
Well, first of all, if we back way up, and when people talk or ask me, okay, who is influential on you? And they'll always think I'm going to say some famous entertainer or athlete, but it's not. It was my coaches and teachers, besides my parents, obviously. But like my 8th grade English teacher was just great guy, and he drove the bus that would take us home after school from basketball or football practice. It wasn't even in the classroom. It was just he was that kind of influence in my life. My 8th grade football coach, same way. I mean, I never forget. I was very introverted. I'm very shy, actually, out there, which is weird. I keep on picking these careers that put me in the public spotlight. But, I'm very introverted. If you saw pictures of me if I was a kid, I was just that kid. I was socially awkward and all that stuff. I'll never forget my 8th grade yearbook, he wrote, "Glenn, you're a star."
Hmm.
I was like, I'll never forget that.
Hmm.
And then my college basketball coach was a guy named Willard Sims. I'd had some issues at my other college. I literally left in the middle of the season and didn't know what I was going to do. And Coach Sims took a chance on me. No one else would have. And if he hadn't done that, I don't know what my life would have been like.
Wow.
So for me, teachers and coaches just had a lot of input, influence, and impact on my life. So I was playing college football. I've always wanted to play sports. It's just my thing, and blew my knee out. Graduated from college. I was actually, my degree's in English Lit, so I was going to teach and coach, but I still wanted to play. And just one day I was watching professional wrestling on TV with a friend of mine. He said, "You might be good at that." So I tried it and just networked, which is also something that's really important. First couple of years were very difficult. And yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people look at someone like me and they think, "Oh my gosh, everything's so easy." And they see that snapshot at kind of, I guess, the culmination of your journey. Boy, they don't see the entire journey, right? and all the peaks and valleys and everything that you have to go through to get to where you want to get to. That's one of the things that I stress when I'm talking to young people is the most important attribute that I think that anyone who's successful has. And by success, I don't mean that they make a lot of money or anything like that. They might, but it's just people that achieve their goals, do what they want to with their life. The one thing I think that sets those folks apart from people who don't is simply persistence. It's not talent. It's not intelligence. It's none of those things. It's persistence and a lot of hard work, because everybody's going to have challenges that are thrown in their path along the way. So that's been the story of my life. I failed a lot of stuff. I found a couple things that I was good at, and that's the great thing too, man. You can strike out a lot, but if you keep swinging, eventually you're going to hit the ball, maybe even hit a home run.
That's so good. And that's a great message for our students to hear, because I think you're right. I know even with my own children, I've had that conversation about I have one daughter who's getting ready to graduate from college, and the conversation was, Dad, this is hard. And I'm like, it's supposed to be. Like this is what
right.
you're proving to your future employers, that you can take something hard, push through it, and that diploma, that's what that means. It's not always what the content was. There's some of that. But in the end, it's that you persevered, you set a goal, you got through that, and they know you're going to bring that attitude to the workplace when you come to it.
And I just want to make sure that they also have opportunities. But it's also about having the skill set. And when I think of the most important things, we talk about soft skills, which is, that term drives me crazy because they're not soft skills. Your interpersonal relationship skills are often the most important thing, but when you have those skills, you can create opportunities for yourself, through entrepreneurism, just being able to take advantage of opportunities that pop up in life, business, career, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think, we're probably very similar on that thinking too, because we often talk about education being the great equalizer.
Yes.
And you're right, probably only in our country that you truly can work hard, take advantage of those opportunities, be prepared. That's what we spend every time talking about Knox County schools. Like, our mission, our role we play in this community is to prepare the next generation. And if it's not ready, that's on us. It's because we haven't produced graduates that are ready to contribute.
Right. And I think it's important to realize that it's not only about the individual students. Okay, they're successful, which we all want, but the only way that our community is going to be successful is if our young people have those tools that they can become successful as well. When you think about our economic viability, it's all about workforce. It's all about talent, right? When companies either want to expand, companies want to come here, the only way they can do that is if we have a talented workforce, especially with the way that the global economy is going, much more high-tech, much more innovative, or much more based on innovation. We have to have people who are able to fill those roles.
It's extremely important, and as Prentice said, we're growing a lot here in Knoxville, and it's important for us to make sure that we are providing those programs, to make sure that we're preparing kids with the skills that they need.
And something else that jumped out at me was, Mary, you talked about those interpersonal skills. I won't say soft skills because I know you like that term. But talk about being a shy kid. How did you learn those skills? How did that come to you? Because obviously that's a big part of what you do now as a politician and a public servant, but also even before in the entertainment industry. And
yeah, I mean, I literally had to study and figure it out. I mean, I read Dale Carnegie. how to win friends and influence people. It didn't come naturally to me, but I do study those interpersonal relationship skills. In my position as being, the leader of Knox County government, I have to have those things. That's part of what I have to bring to the table. I think that a good leader sets an example, almost first and foremost. How you treat people is a very important part of that example. And that's really all I'm talking about. It's showing up to work on time, going the extra mile. And the thing about it is a lot of times that stuff doesn't pay off, but in the long run it does. You may not feel like it does every day, but at the culmination of everything it does. That was the story of my wrestling career. I was always like, okay, what kind of value can I add to the company here? And after those careers of the people who were in it for themselves didn't last very long. Mine was over 20 years, and I wasn't any more talented than a lot of my colleagues. I just took a different approach. I thought about it as a team as opposed to me individually. So it's just experience, but also making an intentional effort to work on those specific aspects of my life and my personality.
Yeah, and making a big impact on your community. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about community, specifically Knox County, and how Knox County prepares and plans for future growth. But for now, you're listening to the Education Blueprint with Dr. Jon Rysewyk. Coming up on the Education Blueprint.
Do you want to live in the place where everyone wants to leave, or do you want to live in the place where people want to come to? I know which one I vote for. But that does present us with challenges and issues.
And later,
learning about leadership is one of the most important things that you can do. So any opportunity you have to do that, volunteering, coaching, anything like that, I would say to go for it.
Welcome back to the Education Blueprint. I'm Dr. Jon Rysewyk, here with my co-host, Prentice Elliott, and Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. Today, we're talking about growth and how it impacts communities and schools. Mayor Jacobs, every time I go to a school, principals stop me. It doesn't matter which end of the community I'm in. They'll take me from the car line. They'll say, oh, you see those apartments going up over there?
Yeah.
We're growing. Or did you drive through that neighborhood on the way here? No, pretty much any school of our 91 that I go to, I get that conversation. So, and looking ahead, according to projections, more than 70,000 people are expected to move to Knox County over the next 10 years. We'll talk about that some in a bit. But in 2024, the county adopted a land use plan and transportation plan called Advanced Knox to prepare for growth. Just maybe could you tell us a little bit about that, kind of how was that developed, and,
Sure.
and what do you think it's going to do for us for the future?
Sure, and let me frame the term growth because that sometimes takes on a negative connotation. Growth is a good thing. People have a choice, at least somewhat, in where they live. The reason that people is coming here is not because anyone's saying you have to move Knox County. It's because we are a nice place to live. One thing that we have to remember is with this growth comes economic opportunity and economic vibrancy. And to me, as mayor, that's my most important job, is to hopefully help create an environment that is business friendly, that people can have good careers, that they can live here, make a good living. And that, to me, that's just the number one priority. And frankly, you have to grow to be able to do that. If you become stagnant, you're in trouble. Just like in your personal life, there is no status quo. You're either growing or you're going the other way, and you want to be growing. But do you want to live in the place where everyone wants to leave, or do you want to live in the place where people want to come to? I know which one I vote for. But that does present us with challenges and issues. One of those is infrastructure, roads, bridges, those sort of things, water, broadband, all that sort of stuff. But then also public services such as schools. So our land use policies had not been revised in over 20 years.
Wow.
And the reality on the ground no longer aligned with those plans. I mean, when they say they were outdated, we had what are now suburban areas and rural areas and what were urban areas or in suburban areas. It just didn't make any sense.
Sounds like those plans were created for a different town.
They were.
Like, this is not,
Yes,
not the same Knoxville now.
Exactly.
That it was then. Yeah.
Exactly. They were created for 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in fact, and we're just completely different than that now. The result has been just bad planning. So look at Hardin Valley. The reason that Hardin Valley is like it is because that's what the zoning called for. 3 units per acre, no retail. And guess what we got? 3 units per acre, no retail everywhere in Hardin Valley. It causes congestion because you don't have grocery stores or restaurants or anything else close to you. and it's a strain on our infrastructure as well, because we just can't do what we need to do. We want to avoid that in the future. And the way that you avoid that is by bringing your land use policies up to where they need to be, basically to modernize that. A big impetus behind Advanced Knox on the infrastructure side is really to encourage town centers, like small town centers. And then kind of as things grow out from there, you get more sparse development, more rural development as you move away. We want to do those along the arteries that can currently support that. What also has happened is when we just get suburban sprawl, we have to build new roads, or we have to widen the roads. We have to spend all this money to basically accommodate that development, instead of saying, no, if you guys build here, we'll make it easier for you. It saves the county a lot of money. The swing of infrastructure costs between the way that we were doing things and with Advanced Knox is estimated about $8 million for a year.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So if we're not spending that money just building new stuff, but maintaining what we have, improving what we have, that's just a better decision, I think.
Can you drill down a little bit and explain $8 million in savings? Where does that money come?
It's basically construction costs and maintenance costs on more miles of roadway, building roads, doing all those sort of things. So instead of saying, okay, we're going to get the development off on this little goat path that we're going to have to then spend millions of dollars bringing up to county standards and to make it into an actual 2-lane road or maybe a 3-lane road. Instead, how about we build along where the road already is? Obviously, the more road miles that we have, the more money that we're spending on maintaining those roads.
So it's using what you've already got.
Yes. It's better utilization of the infrastructure that already exists.
Gotcha.
And again, it's roads, it's water and sewer. Folks should remember that the county is we're not over utility districts. They're separate entities, okay? But nevertheless, there is a cost when they need to extend or repair water or sewer. There's a cost to that, and it's really expensive. Broadband is another thing that's becoming more and more prevalent. And then you get into public services like schools, fire stations, police stations, and all those sort of things.
It's funny, all those things are under the ground, and they're not visible when you drive by, and people forget about the cost, but also couldn't do without the convenience. Like we need all of those things. So it also made me think too. It sounds like the philosophy is a little bit, instead of building something somewhere that people have to travel to, trying to build some of those things, hospitals, retail, closer to them.
Right,
it probably cuts down on commute time,
Exactly.
Maintenance of roads, those things.
It confines that sprawl. Okay, that's really expensive. I think to some extent, I don't think people feel like they're part of a community. Whereas if you have these conveniences and that becomes sort of like mini community hubs around the area, that changes all of that.
I mean, that's similar to, we see that same thing in schools. We joke sometimes, if you go back kind of to Knoxville as it grew, it really is a series of probably 10 or 12 communities around the university, right? I mean, that's kind of how, and we see that same thing with people wanting that name identification on their elementary, middle, and high. Like we're part of the Halls community, the Gibbs community, the Hardin Valley community.
My chief of staff will always say, the only people that say they're from Knoxville or Knox County, they're the ones that don't live here. Because if you live here, you're from Halls, or you're from Gibbs, or you're from South Knoxville.
That's so true. But there is power in that too. I mean, you talked earlier about just this whole desire to serve your community and be part of that. There is a part when you belong to something, you take ownership in it, creating those communities. But what's interesting, what I'm hearing from this Advanced Knox plan is, that's not something that you can leave to chance.
No.
That's something that you almost have to be living 10 years out, to figure out how do we do this. Which is a little bit of a gamble, a little bit of a crapshoot to try to figure out what that's going to look like.
And one of the issues, well, you guys deal with it too with schools, but like with roads, I can't just snap my fingers and there's a new road going somewhere.
Right.
That is a process. Not only do we have to say, okay, we have to get the funding for this, right? But also there's environmental studies, there's things that we have to go through. It's a multi-year process. Now, our guys are good. They really are, and they get things done, I think, more quickly and effectively than many places around the country, but it's still a process. See, I wish I had that crystal ball and I could say, okay, we can do this. Because the problem you run into is, okay, we're going to do this, and then what happens if people don't actually live there. And now you've just wasted a bunch of money building a bridge to nowhere.
Right.
But you do have to be intentional as well. So again, with what we've done with Advanced Knox, it's not so much as saying, okay, we think we're going to build this road and people is going to fill up whatever. Now it's like, well, we have these roads, and why don't we encourage that as opposed to literally discouraging it, which we were doing in some cases. It was like a 2-year process, and we had to hire a consultant that does this around the country. And basically, it's intentional, but it's also a guide and a blueprint. Hopefully this is the way things can go, but it's also flexible enough that if things change, we can change it as well.
Love that flexibility in it. And I think too, for our folks to understand about growth, again, to the schools, but also what you do within the county, is we're not starting with a blank slate.
Yeah, no.
People own property. Some things are historic. There's a mountain there. There's a pond here. There's a natural spring there, and all of those things. Trying to figure that out. That no one really thinks about. So it's not just change is hard on people. Some people want to sell. Some don't. Some want it to stay rural. Some are ready for more amenities, and all of those all of those pieces to try to get a community together on that so it's quite a bit of work to get to here.
One of the things that I was really happy about with Advanced Knox is it wasn't just like we sat down with the consultant and said, okay, just do this. There were a lot of stakeholder meetings. There was a lot of community input. Schools were at the table. Talking about, hey, this is what we think. This is what we think is going to happen. This is what we need. The utility districts, it was a very collaborative effort. And the reason for that is because I'm not omnipotent. I don't know everything. My people are great, but they don't know everything. So you have to get all those different perspectives because there's going to be stuff that we don't know. We're not going to be thinking about, whereas you guys do. And again, that's my hat's off to schools for doing that, because that hasn't always been the case. And sometimes there's been a misalignment between what schools are thinking and what the county's thinking. All of a sudden, hey, we need a new school here. But now it just feels we're able to plan better because we're all talking and communicating a lot better.
Well,
it seems like what I'm hearing is there's always going to be a little bit of science and art. When you're trying
exactly right. Yeah,
to forecast growth.
Yeah, and uncertainty and unpredictability.
Because you have to be ahead of it a little bit at least, so you're not caught unawares. But it seems like this Advanced Knox and the way you guys are trying to do things is to put some guardrails on it, so that there are lanes that you can go down and you've got some paths to choose from as you go forward.
Now that's a great way of putting it. Frankly, we can't control what the market does, and that's ultimately it's what we are dealing with, right? And when I market, I'm just mean people's decisions, where they want to live, and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes I think that there are folks who are we'll just close the door on Knox County. Well, we can't do that. I mean, it'd be great for our infrastructure, but we can't do that. How can we make better decisions about things like land use and planning, about when we needed a new school, where are we going to put that, all those sort of things. It's not completely certain, but we do the best that we can as far as being able to project that.
When we come back, Dr. Rysewyk will actually answer some of those questions. But for now, you're listening to the Education Blueprint. Coming up,
every answer is not always a build. Building's fun, building's exciting, building's expensive, right? All of those kinds of things all play into that.
Welcome back to the Education Blueprint with Dr. Jon Rysewyk. I'm Prentice Elliott, co-host here. And Dr. Rysewyk, we just talked with Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs about how Knox County deals with growth. Let's focus a little bit on Knox County schools. One concern that we hear a lot is that more people moving here means more neighborhoods and more kids in schools. But that's not necessarily the case. We talked with Mike Odom on a previous podcast, the Knoxville Chamber CEO, and he mentioned that a lot of the people moving here are over 55. So that may not mean more students for Knox County schools. So just how do we anticipate school and community needs? How do you know what enrollment is going to be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that's not always simple to answer. So it's a little bit like the mayor said of predicting, looking in the crystal ball and trying to predict, right? And human behavior is not always predictable, but we do have a process for that. We're seeing exactly what Mike Odom from the Chamber told us. A lot of people coming here don't necessarily have students. We've actually seen a slight decrease in our enrollment. And when I say slight, it's in the hundreds of students, but it still has an impact. For us, there really is a kind of formulaic process that we use. we look at it in two different things. We look at year-to-year projections to know what those enrollments are going to be. And that's pretty simple to do when you think about second graders become third graders and third graders become fourth graders. You can kind of take who actually shows up in our attendance bank, and we can look at those, and we do some calculations to consider growth or reduction in students along the way. Those are really typically very accurate because we know the number of students that we have and the names of the students for that matter. We also do a 5-year look out ahead because we're trying to always project what needs we're going to have. That one's not always quite as accurate because things can happen.
Makes sense. A bigger piece of time. It's harder to predict what's going to happen over those 5 years.
And a lot of things can happen. And so we work with the Knox County Planning Commission. We then ask them to look at things like growth, birth rates, all that to try to project out. Kindergarten's probably our toughest grade to project, because that's the first encounter most of those students have with Knox County Schools. First time they're registered, first time they're kind of in our count. But again, we've gotten pretty good at doing that. Overall, using 1-year and 5-year projections, we typically, especially over the last 3 years, very accurate.
I know that we've been sending out notices for kindergarten roundups this time of year, so that's when we're going to get some of that hard data about those kids going into kindergarten next year. So that's enrollment. How does KCS decide when and where to build these new schools?
Every answer is not always a build. Building's fun, building's exciting, building's expensive, right? All of those kinds of things all play into that. So it's real important for us because it's not our money, right? It's taxpayer dollars that are paying for these things. And when you start talking about capital projects, that's 30 years. You think about your mortgage of your house, right? You're paying on this like a 30-year note with interest. That's the same's true when we build buildings as well.
What denotes a capital project? What makes it a capital project as opposed to a different kind of project?
For us, there are things that we have in our annual budget that we use, and that may be things like roads if we're paving a road. If we're doing a lot just at one place, or we're replacing fixtures, light fixtures, right?
Sure.
Like that's something that you would do and just pay for out of kind of our annual budget for the year. When we talk about capital budgets, we're talking about something that we don't have the cash on hand for, and nor does the county. We're part of their debt service when it comes to that. And that works very much like a mortgage that people have on their houses. Those are ones that we have to actually go and sell bonds to generate new dollars, and then we build off of those. And then those actually we pay interest on until it's paid off. So same kind of thing, interest payments, principal payments, all the stuff you're used to on your mortgage. It works the same way for a school, except it's more in the neighborhood of $45 to $60 million, depending on the size of the school.
Sure.
And most of our houses are not that expensive.
Well, so the big stuff, relative to me, that'd be like if I was buying a house, buying a car, the stuff I've got to borrow money from. That's
Correct.
my capital expenses in this case.
Correct. That's how it works.
So anytime that I'm going to spend a bunch of money, I'm going to look at a lot of different factors to decide how best to do that. How do you decide what, when, where these big expenditures take place?
Really the same way, looking at a lot of different data points. The first thing we try to do is figure how we don't have to take on debt. Like that's the most responsible thing to do. Again, taxpayer dollars that are coming in. So we want to make sure we're maximizing the use of what we have. So sometimes we'll look at something that it's easy to rezone, like a neighborhood, right? It makes sense that this one's closer here. We have capacity in this school to be able to do that. And so sometimes we'll just make those little tweaks along the way to make sure that happens. We want to use the facilities we have first. Sometimes then we look at different things like, can we just build on a wing? We have a school that in the northern part of our county right now that's what we did. There was a need for some upgrades in facilities, and with that we added some classrooms and some other functionality. Much cheaper than building a new building. We own the land. We could do that. But sometimes you look at something and the population growth is so fast in an area that you can't do that by just rezoning. You can't do that just by adding on to a few of the surrounding buildings. And so you have to build a school. So a lot of things go into that. For us, we want to make sure we have the projections. We see the houses being built. We've worked with outside agencies to show the numbers are going to have that demand. Typically, all the surrounding schools around that are on the verge of overcrowding. It would be great to predict that, but you never know if things are going to happen. So typically, you have to get to that tipping point where you're maxed out class sizes. Sometimes people are familiar with traveling teachers that might be on carts. Like those are the kinds of things we see in the schools around that to go, there's probably a need for that. At that point, we do build the school. We look again at what size that needs to be. We try to maximize the largest amount we can get for the dollars that we can. We have standards for programming, what needs to go in that, considering special education, considering the grade levels that'll be served, all the ADA or compliance pieces that we need for all that. So there's a whole standard on how we build. But typically at that point, we decide there needs to be one. You have to have land before that happens. That's a purchase in and of itself. And I would say that's probably once the decision to build is out there, I think that's where really the real work starts. The greatest challenge typically is this. You don't build those schools until the families are there most of the time, until the need is there, and that's usually when land is not as cheapest and is not as available because you had a lot of houses going up and people moving in there. And so sometimes people ask us, well, why don't you project that ahead of time and buy it 10 years out or 20 years out? And we often look at that and say, if we did that, took that philosophy today, we would be buying probably cow pastures in parts of the county that may not develop in the next 50 years. So you made an investment in land that you may never use.
Yeah. Just like Mayor Jacobs talked about how, 25 years ago, Knoxville, Knox County was a very different city and county than it is today. The surrounding areas around Knox County schools, it's the same exact thing. You just don't know ahead of time always where people are going to be. But once you do have a really good idea of where those needs are and you're going to make this huge investment in a community, how do you ensure that that is going to pay off going forward?
Yeah, and that's really important too, because a word Mayor Jacobs used that I liked was talking about plans need to have flexibility. We believe that too. We try to typically on those capital plans for those large projects, we have a 5-year plan that the board adopts annually, but they can look ahead to 5 years to kind of know what expenses we have coming in the future. It's real important for us, and we've kind of taken this approach for the last 3 years of what we call a community solution. The way we did that historically, you can put something out 5 years and say, we're going to build an elementary school in X community in 5 years. And the problem with that is by the time you get to that 5-year mark, you may not need an elementary school, you may need a middle school, or you may need to design something a little bit different. And once you've put that on paper that you're going to do that, the community starts anticipating that. That's difficult. It may not be the best solution 5 years from now. So we've moved more to putting dollars out in future years, knowing we need to do something in that community. And then we call it a community solution. As that time gets closer, we then go to that community for a couple of different things. One, we do want input from the community. We want to hear what they're seeing, what they're saying, but we also can't make decisions based on polls from the community either, right? There's other factors that come in as well. We have to make sure that whatever best practices are in education at that point, new ventilation systems, classroom sizes, types of teaching spaces that weren't around 20 years ago. So we have to be flexible to what those best practices might be. And then we also have to look at these programmatic needs. So I think folks will understand different types of classroom. A chorus classroom might hold 50 students when they're performing and doing that sort of thing. You might have other classrooms that are special pull-out classrooms for interventions or tutoring that might have 5 to 10 kids in it. So every classroom is not the same when you design that out. So we look at input from the community. We also look at what best practices in education are around the buildings. And then we look at what are those programmatic needs for that area for the programs we need to build. And
you're talking about a 5-year plan. To make those kind of changes, how much flexibility has to be built into that?
So typically once we've gotten to that place where the board's approved it, that's when it kind of really pencil to paper and we talk through all these things. It's usually about a 3 to 5 year plan after that vote's made, because our typical first step would be, again, to do a lot of scouting for the right land that we can find, the acreage that we need. Elementary, middle, and high schools take different amounts of acreage that we have to have, but we're talking about 20 to 40 acres of land that are needed. If you have a high school, you're thinking about a football field, you're thinking about a track, you're thinking about all those pieces that go with it. And so we have to find that piece of land first, bring that to the board for purchase, and then comes all the work about what's the building going to look like, what's the layout on there, the architectural drawings, all of those pieces that are part of that. That doesn't happen until we've done the community engagement piece, and then we'll go back into the architects kind of like based on our needs. Sometimes there's a cost adjustment. If things have gone up at that point, we have to make an adjustment to what the cost is going to be. Then there's groundbreaking, then there's the actual build. People think, great, the board voted last night to approve this school. Can't wait for my kindergarten to go there. Well, your kindergarten might be a third grader before they go to that school, because it still may be a 3 to 5 year time period before that school actually opens with all the pieces that have to be done.
And speaking of those kids, when you've got this brand new building with this huge investment, how do you decide which kids are going to go there from the surrounding area?
Yeah, we can go back to the original need for the school, right? I mean, if we built the school, why do we build it? And so we kind of have some idea. Typically, it's going to be an enrollment or a growth issue. But there are times when we've actually gone back because we have an aged facility where it makes sense if maybe some schools have gotten really small to combine some of those schools into a more state-of-the-art facility, because sometimes we have some schools that, have been around for a while, and it's almost cheaper and better for that community to build a new school. So, but those are probably more the exceptions to the rule. It's typically around enrollment trends and where we see that growth coming. So we'll start back. Again, we have a team that will look at where natural boundaries are, hillsides, rivers, railroad tracks, all those kinds of things. I guess railroad tracks not natural, but it's there. Those kinds of things. And then we'll look at kind of roadways, passages. We have buses that transport a lot of our students. So we look at all that and then start looking at what neighborhoods would make up that new school.
So when we talked to Mayor Jacobs, he talked about Advance Knox and how community and stakeholder input was a big part of their process, but it was only a part. I know that community input is also a part of Knox County schools and the capital plan and building new things. Talk to me about why that may not be the only part of our planning process.
It's another great question. So it is, as you said, it is very important that we hear from the community. They'll be the ones who will be sending their students there. They're also ones who probably have been attending schools around there and have certain expectations, and we would definitely want the new school to reflect that. But there are other pieces, too, that we have to take into consideration. One of those is kind of what are best practices in the educational space, and that continues to evolve, too. So we need to stay abreast of what those are and make sure every facility that we build, we talk about this lots of times. If we build a facility, there's a real good chance a new one's not going in that space for the next 50 years. So we want to make sure that it is future ready. So there are restrictions, too, that the general public may not know. Some of those are you can only go up so high if you're stacking a school. Like a pre-K school can't be over 2 levels. A lot of that's based on safety for evacuation and those sorts of things. So sometimes we go, why can't we just go 3 or 4 levels on that?
Right, or just add a few more levels to an existing building.
Exactly, and we can't for those reasons, and they're good reasons. And again, we've seen buildings evolve over time. The buildings we're building now have different auditorium spaces than probably the ones we built 75 years ago. There's different needs for different functions. As we've seen education individualize more to be able to try to reach the individual student. We have students with different kinds of needs, like special education needs. There are parts of the county where students can't go to school in their community because that program's not offered at that school. And so they'll go to a surrounding school, and we'll pay for the transportation for them to go there. When we deal with building a new school, we try to take that into consideration and say, well, let's build that program here now.
And when you talk about the programs not offered there, you're talking about programs that may not be offered because the building can't support it.
Correct. There's some that just don't have the space for that. Sometimes a contained special education classroom, you're not going to have 35 students in there, right? So it's going to be a little different based on the needs of that students. There's some that might have like a small kitchen space to teach life skills in, things like that. And again, it's not a typical classroom that you're going to see. That's important for us. Tutoring, something that's very important too. You usually do that in smaller groups of kids. You don't need a full classroom of 35 students for that. We've even seen things like STEM and labs. We've seen arts programs that are part of that, even pre-K classrooms that have very different requirements for things like height of the water fountains, right? Like all those things start playing into it. Think of it this way: from the community, we try to get the values, what's important, what's the feel, what's the programming that's important, and then we have to take the expertise knowledge then that we have to plan for that community to be successful 50 years down the road.
But having said that, in each community, each school that's built would be very unique to that community.
Yeah, it will be. I mean, obviously there's some standard things,
Sure.
that have to be in every school. We've added actually a dimension where we're starting to look at some of the programming too when we go. Education continues to evolve. We've seen over the last 5 to 6 years really this kind of increased involvement of families, this increased desire to have some flexibility, maybe not just choose a traditional path. So we also try to take that approach when we come into a community. If it makes sense to do something uniquely programmatically, STEM, International Baccalaureate, those kinds of programs, arts programs, we try to look at that and go, would this be a good place to offer a little bit of choice to a community? So all of those factors go into it. One of my favorite quotes is still from Henry Ford that says, if I had just asked the people, they would have wanted faster horses, right? They didn't know what a car was. And sometimes that's our job as educators, to show some possibilities of what might be and what maybe is innovative practice that's happening somewhere else that we can bring to Knoxville.
Yeah, and build in that flexibility to be able to change as we go.
100%.
So generally, Knox County schools are following similar processes to plan for growth as the city and county, using community input and a lot of important data points to think about how to address a current problem in a way that is still helpful 10, 25, 50 years from now. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about how building isn't always the answer and what we do when it isn't. Still to come on the Education Blueprint.
We actually are building strategic guardrails by which we can make those decisions and be intentional about what we're trying to do. If we place a school here, why are we placing it there?
Welcome back to the Education Blueprint with Dr. Jon Rysewyk. I'm Prentice Elliott, your co-host and producer, and a parent with 5 kids in public school. We heard a lot from Mayor Jacobs about growth in Knox County, which is the 3rd biggest community in the state. The most recent census data shows 100,000 kids under 18 years old living in Knox County, and just over 77,000 of them are 5 to 18 years old. Our enrollment numbers mean we're educating nearly 75% of those kids. So, Dr. Rysewyk, how do we keep pace with growth while maintaining and supporting that?
That's a great challenge. And the mayor was right. We are growing. We don't always see that right now in our big boost in our enrollment numbers. Some folks moving here are retirement age, and some folks moving here are young and haven't started a family yet. So we rely on a lot of those organizations like the Knox County Planning Commission to help us with some of those trends. But ultimately, we have to plan for that. And so for us, I think, again, people see growth and they think new buildings. And there are other ways we look at that. We want to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Part of that is taking care of the current facilities you have. And you don't just do that by waiting for things to break, right? You have to be strategic in thinking and planning ahead, deferred maintenance and planning that out. And 2 years ago, we did a full facility assessment of every one of our facilities, 91 schools, actually closer to 100 facilities when you look at all the spaces that we have.
It's a lot of buildings.
It is. It's a whole lot of buildings. And when you talk about everything that goes into that, the plumbing, the air conditioning units, the roofing, all those things that are part of that. So what we try to do and what we try to do with this facility assessment is we had a third party come in and actually spent about a year in every one of our facilities. They dated every one of the systems we kind of just talked about, and then we're able to put those into spreadsheets for us where we can monitor and we can actually rank. And it doesn't guarantee that we're just going to follow that every time because even a 2-year-old roof might leak. So you have to be ready for those kinds of things that aren't in our plan. But we do really try to plan then based on kind of what's due this year so that cost doesn't hit us all at once. We live in a place where air conditioning you pretty much have to have when you start school, or it's almost impossible to have school. So that's important for us to be on top of our HVAC units and work in those kinds of things. So our operations team really uses that to make plans for budgets and future budgets and also to justify what they're spending and why they're planning that for this time. Think about roads and pavement. Heard the mayor talk about that, all the roads they do. Mm-hmm. When you look at our parking lots and our drives to the school, that's a lot of paving, and we're responsible for all that too.
We talk about just building a new school, and you said that obviously that's what everybody wants, but it may not be the best solution even for the people that want that. If one of my middle schoolers, if I think their school needs an update, they're not going to be in that middle school by the time that construction's finished if there's a new school built. So these are long-term solutions that you look at. And if you want to benefit the most amount of people that are in that school right now, sometimes you have to look at solutions that can take place the next year, that can be more immediate.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a balance of the two. We talked about enrollment being a 1-year projection and a 5-year projection. Really maintaining facilities and planning for that is similar too.
So we talked to the mayor, Mayor Jacobs, about growth in Knox County. We've heard from you about growth in Knox County schools. How are these two things on parallel tracks? How do you guys work together in this? How do they diverge? Give me a little more detail on that.
Yeah, I think, the school system is very similar. I mean, one, we're dealing with the same community, right? So the same trends that we're seeing in growth and kind of explosion of population, we're seeing too. What I appreciated, and I think is similar, is neither the mayor or Knox County Schools are having a knee-jerk reaction to that. It's a call to dig deeper and to look into what does the data say? Again, who's really moving here? Where are they moving? What's the assessment of our current status of our facilities and our programs in the schools that we have them? Heard that same thing from the mayor talking about doing that for the county. And then where there are gaps, we have to come up with plans. And I think, for us in the school system, we've talked about, sometimes that warrants a rezone, sometimes that warrants an addition, sometimes that warrants planning for a new school that may take 3 to 5 years to build before we realize that. So, in all of those things, we want to make sure we're not reactionary, but that we're actually looking at it. I think the other thing where we parallel the county is not just leaving it up to chance or to the loudest voices, right? We actually are building strategic guardrails by which we can make those decisions and be intentional about what we're trying to do. If we place a school here, why are we placing it there? Because it's going to have a 50-year impact before we probably are able to touch that area again. If we're rezoning neighborhoods to make that happen, that's change for people too. That's a change in the feeder pattern. That has an impact as well. If we're choosing to build on, is that really going to take care of the situation, or are we already 10 years behind that? So everything we try to do tries to have a strategic outcome based on data that we think we can solve the solution for that community.
You mentioned not having the knee-jerk reaction, and both you and the mayor talked about that, but also having a plan in place that can change, that has different things built in so that you can move within that framework and adapt and be innovative as well.
100%. Flexibility is important. I mean, again, we can't fully predict the future. We use the data to make our best assumptions, but we don't always know that they're going to happen.
Very true. And speaking of the future, when we come back, Mayor Jacobs will share some advice for students who may be interested in one day being the people who make or help make those decisions. You're listening to The Education Blueprint with Dr. Jon Rysewyk. Still to come.
Learning about leadership is one of the most important things that you can do. So any opportunity you have to do that, volunteering, coaching, anything like that, I would say to go for it.
You're listening to The Education Blueprint. I'm Dr. Jon Rysewyk with our guest, Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. Mayor Jacobs, you serve the public and chose to do that. So what advice would you give to those interested in getting involved in the government or pursuing community service?
Unfortunately, elected officials in general, I think, probably have a pretty bad reputation now. And the reason is because, frankly, there are some people that are self-serving. I thought that before I got into office, and then I meet all the local officials from Knox County, great people. The reason they're great people is because their purpose is to serve the people of Knox County, not themselves. So the most important thing is to do it for the right reasons. You have to get into it to serve and not to be served. That's just number one thing. If you don't do that, you're not going to be happy anyway. Because frankly, the job isn't fun when everybody's yelling at you. But sometimes that's what it is. And the reason you do that is because hopefully you're having a positive impact on the direction of your community.
You definitely have to know your why, right? There are going to be those days when you have to clean back to that, when things are probably not looking right in the press or looking right in the public forum, those kinds of things that come out.
That's exactly right.
You have to know there's a greater vision and why you're called to do it. So I think that's great.
And organizations rise and fall based on leadership. That's just a very important factor. We often don't take that into account, but I've seen it myself with things that I've been involved with. When you have good, competent people taking control of the direction of the ship, things are a lot better. But when the ship is just sitting there and going in circles, that's not constructive, and eventually you're going to have some real problems. You can look back and think, nothing I've done is really me. It's all my team and everybody else, right? But I do look back and think, okay, we accomplished this and we accomplished this, and those are really important things. In some cases, they're life-changing. And that reward is just, it's priceless.
That's really great advice. I know we have a lot of kids across the district who are dipping their toe into this. Of course, we have the student rep on the Board of Education who's a high school student. But a lot of our elementary and middle schools have recycling clubs, student councils, safety patrols, other things like that, led by their teachers and coaches. And I think it's just a great way to show that you're never too young to make a difference. Those are some of those opportunities for leadership that kids can get into now to help them going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, for folks that are interested in getting into government, learning about leadership is one of the most important things that you can do. So any opportunity you have to do that, volunteering, coaching, anything like that, I would say to go for it. And speaking of coaches and teachers, the impact that they have on young people's lives, they don't always know it. I lost touch with all those people I was talking about at some point. I just like to go back and thank them, because I wouldn't be where I'm at if it wasn't for them. As a teacher, you may not know the future impact there, and you may never know that because they may not come back and tell you that, but you are. You're molding young people and you're shaping the future, and that's something to be very proud of.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in, and I want to take this opportunity just to thank you. You talk about leadership and how important that is, and I just want to say, as the superintendent, it's great to have a mayor to work with who's always looking forward to the future. Two areas that I've seen that over time and time again for you is literacy, the importance of reading, and workforce development. And to me, both of those things are critically important if Knoxville is going to be successful for the future. And for someone who as busy as you are to say these are two things that I'm going to understand are important for the future of Knoxville, I just want to thank you for your involvement in that.
Well, thank you, and you're part of that as well. The reason that our community is doing so well right now is because we have so much alignment just with all these different institutions and organizations. Hasn't always been that way, but it is now, and it's pretty amazing what can happen when everybody rows in the same direction and no one is worried about who gets credit for the results.
It's true. We'll have a better Knoxville. So thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, Please share it and follow and subscribe to the Education Blueprint with Dr. Jon Rysewyk for easy access to all of our newest content. And if you can, leave us a review. It really helps others find the show. The Education Blueprint with Dr. Jon Rysewyk is a production of Knox County Schools and hosted by Dr. Jon Rysewyk with me, Prentice Elliott. Our team also includes Knox County Schools Assistant Superintendent of Strategy, Corey Lautner, KCS Creative Services Supervisor, Abby Harris, and KCS Executive Director of Public Affairs, Carly Harrington. Kaylee Walker coordinates promotion at Knox Schools on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Our cover art was designed by Justin Johnson.